My twin brother showed up at my place last year covered in bruises. His wife's brothers had been using him as a punching bag for over a year, so we traded lives and I made sure they'd never forget what they did. Okay, Reddit, here's the story. I'm an identical twin, and last spring I opened my front door and found a version of myself that looked like he'd come out the wrong side of a battlefield. That was Ethan. And what happened after changed everything. I'm Nathan, 32, male, a civil engineer with a construction company in Seattle. Solid job, my own condo, dependable truck, nothing fancy about my life. Ethan and I are indistinguishable to most people. Same height, same frame, same face, even the tiny scar over the left eyebrow we got after crashing our bikes as kids. When we were younger, we used that to our advantage. Trading classes, switching places at family parties, confusing basically everyone who wasn't our parents. We stayed close through school and into adulthood, even though we ended up in different careers. Ethan works in marketing. He met his wife, Kristen, at an industry event about 5 years back. They fell fast, got married quickly, and then Sophie was born. She's 4 now. I stood beside him as his best man and watched him beam as he said his vows. He truly looked like he'd built the perfect life, stable job, gorgeous wife, sweet kid, nice suburban home. So nothing prepared me for what happened that Tuesday night in March. I was at my table going over blueprints for a commercial site when someone knocked. It wasn't a normal knock. Too hesitant, almost embarrassed, like whoever was there wasn't sure they should be. I remember setting down my coffee, feeling this strange tightness in my chest as I went to the door. When I opened it, I didn't immediately register that it was Ethan. Not because he didn't look like me, but because something in him had collapsed. It was like someone had scooped out the confident brother I grew up with and left only the shell. His posture was wrong, shoulders slumped, head hanging. And then he looked up, and I saw the damage. These weren't accidental bruises. They were intentional. His left cheekbone was a dark, angry purple with that fading yellow-green halo you get when a bruise is days old. His lower lip had split and crusted over. When he shifted, there was this tiny, sharp wince as he clutched his ribs like a single wrong breath might shatter him. His knuckles were scraped raw, but the worst part was his eyes, empty in a way I had never seen before, not even after our mom died when we were kids. This was something deeper. Someone had broken him down piece by piece. I stepped aside without thinking, letting him walk in. He moved like a ghost drifting through an unfamiliar world. I shut the door, locked it, and turned back toward him. He stood in the middle of my living room with his arms crossed over his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. The silence stretched until I finally said his name. He actually flinched. Seeing my brother react like that hit me with a cold, sharp panic. "What happened?" I asked. My voice came out harsher than I meant it to, coated in fear and anger. He didn't speak for a while. He lowered himself onto the edge of the couch like every inch of him hurt. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together so tightly the blood drained from them. When he finally talked, his voice was torn and barely audible. "It's Kristen's brothers," he said. "Blake and Craig." My stomach dropped. I knew them. Loud, pushy, always acting like they owned every room they walked into, talking over people, puffing themselves up at holidays. And apparently, they'd done far worse when no one was watching. Blake was the older one, mid-30s, worked in construction management. Craig was around 30, in sales. Both of them carried that loud, swaggering confidence that comes from never being meaningfully challenged in their lives. I'd always assumed they were just the kind of guys you put up with because you have no choice, not because you actually enjoyed their company. But this was something else entirely. Over the next 2 hours, Ethan told me everything. The details spilled out in broken pieces, his voice wavering, his hands trembling as he tried to explain what his life had become over the past year. It started small, he said. A shove here, a cruel joke there. Always disguised as harmless roughhousing between men, always brushed off as just messing around. They made fun of him at family dinners, ridiculed his job in marketing, called him weak, spineless, not man enough for their sister. Sometimes Kristen laughed with them. Sometimes she just stayed silent, turning away as her brothers chipped away at Ethan's confidence one insult at a time. Ethan thought he could push through it. If he kept quiet, didn't make waves, maybe they'd eventually get bored and back off. But things escalated instead. They began showing up unannounced, walking into the house like they owned the place, raiding the fridge, taking over the TV, acting like Ethan didn't exist in his own home. When Kristen wasn't around, they'd watch him closely, testing him, daring him to push back. 6 months ago, everything changed. One evening, Blake shoved Ethan into a wall simply because he asked them to leave. Sophie was trying to sleep upstairs. Ethan tried to hold his ground, tried to set even the smallest boundary. That's when the first real beating happened. They cornered him in the garage that Saturday, accusing him of embarrassing the family, of forgetting his place. Craig pinned his arms while Blake punched him over and over, not wildly, not enraged, but coldly, almost calculated, like he was teaching a lesson. They threatened him afterward, told him to keep his mouth shut, insisted no one, not even Kristen, would believe him, and if he dared make it an issue, they'd ruin him. They'd take his marriage, his daughter, his reputation. They'd convince everyone he was unstable, violent, a liar. And knowing how Kristen's parents, Frank and Patricia, idolized their sons, how the whole family rallied around Blake and Craig no matter what, Ethan believed them. So he stayed quiet. He swallowed the bruises, the intimidation, the humiliation, just trying to survive. The violence became routine. Blake would drop by while Kristen was at work, force his way inside, and vent whatever stress he carried by beating on Ethan. Sometimes Craig joined in, holding Ethan down while Blake delivered blow after blow. They were strategic, mostly body shots, the kind you could hide beneath clothing. When his face took damage, Ethan blamed work accidents or clumsiness. Kristen noticed, but accepted those excuses without digging deeper. Maybe she didn't want to face the truth. Maybe she chose not to. Either way, she never confronted anything, never chose him over the illusion of family peace. The worst part, Ethan said, was how they weaponized Sophie. They made veiled comments about how fragile kids can be. They mentioned custody fights, how courts favor the mother, how easy it would be to paint Ethan as incompetent. Those threats paralyzed him. They locked him in a nightmare where he couldn't speak or seek help without risking his daughter. "I'm scared all the time," he confessed, voice cracking. "Scared they'll go further. Scared they'll hurt Sophie. Scared Kristen will side with them the moment I give her a reason to choose. I feel like I'm drowning, and there's no way out." Then he looked at me, eyes rimmed with red, desperate, pleading, and asked for help. Not someday, not eventually. He needed help right then. He said he had to get away for a bit, to breathe, to think, to recover. But he couldn't simply walk out. If he vanished, Blake and Craig would hunt him down, or worse, retaliate through Sophie. He needed someone to step into his life temporarily. Just long enough to buy time, and because we were identical, twins, because we'd spent our entire lives being mistaken for each other unless someone inspected us closely. He thought I could pull it off. He asked me to become him, take over his routine, assume his place, live in his home, and endure what he'd been enduring while he disappeared somewhere safe to heal. I should have refused. Any rat. I know person would have. The plan was risky, reckless, and legally questionable. But I didn't say no. I looked at Ethan, my twin, my mirror, the person who'd been with me from the start, and saw the fear in every line of his face, the fatigue, the bruises, the desperation. I couldn't send him back into that house alone. I couldn't let those men keep destroying him piece by piece. So I said yes. I told him I'd do it. I'd step into his life, confront his tormentors, and give him the time he needed to escape. And I made a silent promise to myself. Blake and Craig would face consequences. I wasn't just going to endure what they did. I was going to expose them, collect evidence, tear down their control, make sure they never hurt Ethan again. We spent the next 3 days planning every detail with near military precision. I stayed at Ethan's apartment while we prepared, using my condo as the command center for gear and documentation. Ethan walked me through every tiny routine of his daily life, from the way he tied his shoes to the specific streets he avoided on his drive to work, because they spiked his anxiety. He showed me pictures and videos of his office setup, taken quietly over the past weeks so I could blend in without raising suspicion. I memorized the names of everyone Ethan worked with. David, who sat in the next cubicle and never missed an opportunity to talk sports. Linda from accounting, who baked homemade cookies every Friday and insisted everyone take at least 2. His boss, Jennifer, who constantly pushed for impossible turnaround times. I studied Ethan's ongoing campaigns, absorbed the details of his clients, practiced the marketing terminology he used daily until it felt natural. Evenings were devoted to learning his home life. Ethan played videos of Sophie at dinner time during play sessions while she got ready for bed. I studied everything, his tone when reading her storybooks, the silly voices he used for different characters, the 5-second countdown he used when she stalled at bedtime, the way he celebrated each new drawing she made. Sophie was obsessed with dinosaurs, especially velociraptors, and she loved sketching elaborate jungle scenes. She carried around a stuffed triceratops named Mr. Stompy like it was a family member. Kristen was harder to unravel. Ethan described how she took her coffee, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, always in the blue mug her parents had given her. She worked as a billing coordinator at a medical office downtown, left the house around 7:30 each morning, returned a little after 5. She hated talking about work once she was home, preferred zoning out to reality TV, and had developed a tendency to scroll through her phone instead of engaging in actual conversation. She wasn't always like this, Ethan said quietly one night. When we first married, we'd talk for hours. We planned our future, dreamed together, but when her brothers started coming around more, she drifted away. Bit by bit, she chose them over me until hardly anything was left of us. The marriage had been wearing down for at least 2 years, he explained. Tiny fractures that accumulated. Kristen valuing her brother's opinions more than Ethan's feelings, brushing aside his concerns about their invasive behavior, joining in when they mocked him or pretending it was harmless joking instead of calculated humiliation. Then Ethan walked me through the dynamics with Blake and Craig in excruciating detail. Blake usually came by on Wednesday evenings, sometimes Thursday afternoons if he took time off work. He'd unlock the door with the key Kristen gave him early in the marriage, stroll right in and assert control immediately, eating their food, commenting on the house, grilling Ethan about finances or the state of the relationship. The physical intimidation always started subtly, standing too close, blocking exits, giving friendly shoulder pats that were just hard enough to hurt. If Kristen wasn't home, Blake escalated, slamming Ethan into walls, grabbing his shirt, getting inches from his face while issuing threats about what would happen if he ever complained. Craig was different, more methodical. He came on weekends, usually Saturday mornings when Kristen took Sophie to her parents' house. He'd bring takeout, act pleasant at first, then slowly slip into interrogation mode, asking about Ethan's performance at work, his income, his savings, whether he felt competent as a husband and father. Every question a disguised blade. Craig's the one who threatened Sophie first, Ethan said, hands trembling. He dropped it into conversation like it didn't matter, mentioned how easily accidents happen with kids, how awful it would be if something happened because I wasn't being careful enough. He smiled when he said it, actually smiled, like he liked watching me realize he could destroy me. Both brothers had keys, both acted like they owned the place, both had made it clear that if Ethan ever revealed the truth, they'd take everything from him. They'd already crafted a plan. They'd say Ethan was mentally unstable, claim any defensive wounds were evidence he was violent, and present themselves as protective brothers trying to shield their sister from an abusive spouse. It was deliberate, systematic, and effective because Ethan was terrified of losing Sophie, and because no one in Kristen's family would believe him over her brothers. So I set up hidden cameras throughout the house, small devices disguised as normal items, a mantle clock, a phone charger in the kitchen, a smoke detector in the hallway, all of them recorded continuously to a secured cloud account only I could access. I bought a tiny audio recorder shaped like a pen and kept it in my shirt pocket whenever I was home. I documented everything: Ethan's existing bruises, his detailed accounts of previous assaults, copies of medical records from an ER visit he'd blamed on a fall down the stairs. On the 4th day, we made the switch. Ethan trimmed his hair to match the slightly longer cut I had. We swapped clothes, wallets, phones, keys. Then I drove him 3 hours north to a remote cabin I'd rented. I stocked it with groceries and supplies. No connection to either of us, paid in cash, remote enough that he could finally breathe without feeling hunted. Stay here, I told him in the cramped living room. Rest, heal, process everything. I'll handle Blake and Craig. I'll document what they do, and once I have enough evidence, we'll gut them legally. Ethan looked at me with a mix of gratitude, guilt, and something like fragile hope. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, I said. You're my brother. Go take a real shower, sleep in a safe bed, let yourself recover. I'll check in every few days. Then I drove back to Seattle and moved into Ethan's house. Kristen was at work, Sophie at daycare. I walked through each room, memorizing the layout, absorbing every detail. The family portraits on the walls, Sophie's artwork pinned to the fridge, Kristen's reading glasses resting on the coffee table. When Kristen came home that evening with Sophie in tow, I was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner. I made spaghetti with meat sauce, one of Ethan's typical weeknight dinners. I'd practiced his posture in the mirror. The slightly hunched shoulders, the guarded stance, the way he'd learned to shrink himself over time, minimizing anything that might draw attention. "Hey," I said when Kristen walked in, keeping my voice steady and subdued. "Hey," she echoed without looking at me, dropping her purse and helping Sophie out of her jacket. Traffic was awful. "Sophie, go wash your hands for dinner." The 4-year-old dashed off toward the bathroom, and Kristen moved around the kitchen with the habitual efficiency of someone who'd performed the same routine countless times. She didn't notice a thing. Why would she? I'd perfected the broken version of Ethan she was accustomed to. The first evening passed quietly. I read Sophie her bedtime story, a tale about a velociraptor who dreamed of being a ballerina, mimicking all the voices Ethan had practiced with me. Sophie laughed at the T-Rex's clumsy pirouettes and hugged Mr. Stompy tight as I tucked her in. She looked up at me with total trust, and the gravity of what I was doing hit me like a punch. This child depended on her father to keep her world safe, and I had to uphold the deception flawlessly to protect her. Kristen watched TV in the living room while I cleaned the kitchen, exactly the way Ethan described, wiping down each counter, loading the dishwasher in the order she preferred, staying invisible. She barely acknowledged me, too absorbed in a reality show where wealthy housewives argued about event planning disasters. We went to bed with almost no conversation. I slept in the guest room, claiming I had a cold and didn't want to pass it to her, a line Ethan had suggested, knowing Kristen's germ aversion would make her welcome the distance. The guest room became my command center. After she fell asleep, I reviewed the day's footage, typed up detailed notes, uploaded everything to multiple secure cloud backups. I kept a spreadsheet of every interaction, times, dates, quotes, behavior patterns, all documented with the same precision I brought to engineering projects. Blake arrived Wednesday evening, right on schedule. I'd gotten home around 6 and was heating leftovers in the microwave when I heard a key turn in the low. He strode in without knocking, heading straight to the fridge to grab a soda as if he owned the place. "Hey there, champ," he said in that patronizing tone Ethan had warned me about. Blake was a large man, about 6 feet 2 inches, maybe 220, gym-built rather than practically strong. He carried himself like someone who'd never been challenged, who'd coasted through life bullying people smaller than him because no one dared confront him. "Rough day pushing papers?" he added. I kept my gaze lowered, playing Ethan's role exactly, just long, lots of meetings. "Yeah, meetings." Blake barked a laugh like I'd told a great joke. "Must be exhausting sitting in conference rooms talking about marketing crap while real men do real work. My crew poured foundation for a 3-story office building today. Built something that'll actually last." The message was clear. Ethan's career was meaningless. His contributions irrelevant. This was the same script he always used. Establish superiority, belittle, dominate. I focused on my food. Blake moved around the kitchen island, closing in, crowding me against the counter. Ethan had warned me this was always the preamble. Small intrusions meant to reassert control. "Kristen working late again?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "She'll be home around 7. Good. Good. Wouldn't want her seeing her husband acting like such a pathetic loser, right?" He shoved my shoulder. Not enough to hurt, but enough to intimidate. "You're embarrassing her. My sister deserves better than some soft marketing nerd who can't even stand up for himself. She could have married anyone, but she settled for you." The recorder in my pocket captured every word perfectly. The hidden camera disguised as a kitchen clock caught the entire scene. Blake's stance, the shove, the way he boxed me in. I let him continue, maintaining the submissive demeanor he expected. Rounda. D shoulders, averted gaze, minimal responses. For about 20 minutes he kept it up. Criticizing the kitchen, my reheated dinner, my clothes, my job, my posture, my existence. Each comment carefully crafted to break down Ethan's self-esteem, just as he had done for over a year. When Kristen's car pulled into the driveway, Blake transformed instantly. His tone brightened, posture softened, expression turned jovial. Suddenly, he was the doting older brother checking in out of concern. He ruffled my hair, an intimate gesture to anyone watching, but really another power move. "Good talk, champ," he said loudly as Kristen entered. "Just making sure my sister's being taken care of. Family has to look out for each other, right?" Kristen smiled, either oblivious or choosing to be. "Thanks for checking in, Blake. Want to stay for dinner?" "Nah, got plans. See you this weekend at Mom and Dad's." As he left, he shot me a silent warning, a glare that promised consequences if I said a word. After he was gone, I ate dinner with Kristen and Sophie, playing the timid husband while mentally cataloging every detail for future use. Sophie chattered about finger painting and a friend who brought cookies, and I responded in the gentle way Ethan had shown me. The recorder kept running in my pocket, documenting everything. That night, after Kristen and Sophie fell asleep, I reviewed the video and audio files. They were flawless. Clear footage showing Blake's aggression, crisp audio capturing every insult, every threat. I added it all to the expanding evidence archive, organizing everything in strict chronological order, building a narrative no one could deny or twist. For 7 weeks, the pattern repeated. Blake appeared twice a week, sometimes alone, sometimes dragging Craig with him. They let themselves in, mocked me, shoved me around, and every so often escalated into real violence. I recorded it all, every verbal attack, every physical blow. The cameras documented everything in perfect detail. Craig was different from Blake, not as explosive but far more strategic. He'd make veiled threats about Sophie, talk about how easy it would be to show I was an incompetent father, describe how a custody battle would unfold in their favor. Those recordings were the most damning, evidence of calculated psychological warfare. Around week 4, The physical violence intensified. Blake arrived furious about something at work and took it out on me in the garage. Craig pinned my arms while Blake hammered me with body shots, a couple landing on my face before I could turn away. I endured it, gritting my teeth, reminding myself the recorder in my pocket and the camera in the garage ceiling were catching everything. Kristen noticed the bruises that night. I was in the bathroom checking the damage when she came in. For a moment, I thought she might finally break through the denial, finally acknowledge what was happening. But instead, she just sighed and said, "You need to be more careful." That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't physically participating, but she was enabling it through willful ignorance, choosing comfort over truth. By the 6th week, I had hours upon hours of footage and audio. Blake and Craig had assaulted me 7 separate times, made dozens of threats, and shown a consistent pattern of intimidation and cruelty. I had enough to destroy them legally. All that remained was executing the plan. I chose the perfect moment. Kristen's parents were celebrating their 40th anniversary, and the entire family would be gathered for dinner. Everyone in one place, no chance for Blake or Craig to slither away, maximum exposure, maximum accountability. I told Ethan the plan during our nightly call. He hesitated, afraid things might get violent. But I reassured him this would be the safest approach, public, documented, with witnesses present, and evidence ready to hand over to law enforcement. The night before the anniversary dinner, I assembled everything. I edited the worst clips into a single devastating highlight reel, arranged the audio recordings in sequence, compiled hospital paperwork and photos of injuries. I saved copies onto several USB drives, uploaded all files to secure cloud backups, and assembled packets for the police, Kristen's family, and Ethan's divorce attorney. Yes, I'd already hired one for him. Saturday evening, I arrived at Frank and Patricia's house with Kristen and Sophie. The place was packed, maybe 40 people, a mix of relatives and longtime family friends. Blake and Craig were already there, holding court in the living room, making a group of cousins laugh. When they saw me, Blake smirked and cracked a joke about me actually showing up for once. Craig murmured something to a buddy that made them both snicker. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Dinner unfolded like any big family event. Too much food, overlapping conversations, Frank retelling stories from his early marriage, while Patricia smiled beside him. I played my role flawlessly, quiet, small, passive, the Ethan they were all used to ignoring. After dessert, Frank stood to give a heartfelt speech about love and gratitude. When he finished, I rose from my seat. The room fell still. This wasn't expected. "I'd like to say something too," I said, keeping my voice calm, "about family and what it means to protect the people you care about." Kristen shot me a sharp, uneasy look. Blake and Craig exchanged glances, probably assuming I was about to embarrass myself. I took out the small remote I had brought and aimed it at the TV mounted on the dining room wall. I'd already asked Frank earlier to set up a laptop con, pretending I wanted to show a photo slideshow. He hadn't questioned it. For the past 7 weeks, I began as the screen lit up. I've been documenting something happening within this family, something everyone here needs to see. The first clip played, Blake entering the house uninvited, instantly beginning his verbal attack. The audio was sharp and unmistakable. Every insult, every threat loud and clear. Silence filled the room. Patricia gasped. Frank's face flushed with anger. Kristen went ghost white. Blake started to rise from his chair, but his father barked at him to sit down and watch. The compilation rolled on. 7 weeks of abuse condensed into a brutal 12-minute expose. Blake slamming me into walls, Craig restraining me while Blake pummeled me. The threats, the mockery, the humiliation, all captured on screen for their entire family to witness. Both of them had been making explicit threats toward Sophie, detailing exactly how they would ruin Ethan's life if he ever spoke up. The footage left no room for doubt. Time-stamped, clear, faces unmistakable. Several women in the room began to cry. Frank looked like he might have a heart attack. Blake and Craig froze, their expressions shifting from disbelief to anger, and finally to fear as they realized the full scope of what they were seeing. When the video ended, the room was heavy with silence. I faced 40 witnesses and said, "Blake and Craig have been systematically abusing Ethan for more than a year. They've beaten him, threatened him, terrorized his daughter, and turned his home into a prison. And everyone here in this family allowed it to happen." Blake erupted from his chair, face contorted in rage. "That's not, you can't, this is taken out of context." "Context?" I repeated evenly. "Please explain to everyone here the context in which it's acceptable to assault your sister's husband and threaten a 4-year-old child." Craig tried a different tactic, turning to his parents, desperation creeping into his voice. "Dad, this is insane. He's making it up somehow. We were just what? I interrupted. Just terrorizing someone for a year? Just committing multiple crimes, including assault, battery, criminal threats, and trespassing? All of which I've documented and reported to the police? That was when the second part of my plan unfolded. Two uniformed officers entered through the front door. I had contacted them earlier, explained the situation, provided preliminary evidence, and arranged for them to be on standby during the dinner. They approached Blake and Craig, informing them they were under arrest for assault, battery, criminal threats, and harassment. Blake shouted about lawyers and false accusations. Craig went pale and silent. Both were handcuffed while their parents watched in horror. Friends and extended family stood frozen, and Kristen sobbed quietly in a corner. As they were let out, Blake turned to me, pure hatred in his eyes. "You're going to regret this. We'll destroy you in court. We'll take everything from you." I met his glare calmly. "You already tried to destroy someone for over a year. You tried to break him, make him feel powerless and worthless. But I'm not your victim anymore." Confusion washed over Blake's face, but before he could react further, the officers escorted him to the patrol car. Both brothers were loaded into vehicles and driven away. The house suddenly fell silent, save for Patricia's quiet sobs and the occasional shuffle of shocked guests. I turned to the remaining people. "I think it's time to leave. If anyone wants copies of the evidence for their own understanding, I can provide that. Otherwise, please go." Most guests didn't wait, offering awkward condolences, apologies, or simply fleeing in stunned silence. Before she left, Patricia approached me, tears streaming. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice trembling. I didn't know they were doing this." "I know," I replied. "Maybe you didn't understand the full extent. But there were signs, moments when you could have asked questions, wondered why your son-in-law looked increasingly fearful, worn down. Everyone chose to ignore those signs." She nodded, crying harder, and left with Frank, who remained silent. Soon it was just Kristen and me in the living room. Her face was blotchy, her expression one of fury and disbelief. "How could you do this to my family?" she demanded, voice shaking. "We're going to lose everything because of you." I sank into a chair across from her, the adrenaline fading, exhaustion settling into my bones. "Kristen, your brothers have been assaulting your husband for over a year. They terrorized your daughter and turned your home into a place of fear. You enabled it. You chose their approval over your family's safety. This didn't happen because of me. It happened because of the choices you and your brothers made repeatedly." She shook her head, still clinging to denial. "But they were just protecting me, making sure you treated me right." I laughed bitterly. "Protecting you from what? From a husband who loved you and wanted to build a life together? They weren't protecting you, Kristen. They were controlling you. They were abusing him. And you let it happen because it was easier than standing up to them." I stood, letting the words land. "Divorce papers will be filed within the week. Ethan will be seeking sole custody of Sophie. You should get a lawyer." She opened her mouth to argue, and that's when I revealed the truth. "I'm not your husband," I said clearly. "I'm his twin brother, Ethan. 7 weeks ago, Ethan came to me bruised, terrified, broken. He asked me to switch places with him so he could escape and heal. I stepped in. I've been living his life, taking the abuse he endured, documenting everything, and building a case to bring Blake and Craig to justice." Her face shifted, confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally comprehension. "You're his brother?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Every insult, every strike, every moment of cruelty you've seen me endure was for him. I documented it all. Your husband is safe now, away from you and your brothers. And I made sure they'll face consequences." She sat there, finally letting her denial shatter, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed. I felt no sympathy. "I'll stay here tonight, but you should go to your parents' house," I told her. I went upstairs to the guest room I'd been using, shutting the door behind me. Her crying faded into the background. It was done. I had exposed them, executed the plan perfectly. The rest, the legal proceedings, the consequences, rebuilding, would follow naturally. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan at the cabin. He answered on the first ring, voice tight with anxiety. I walked him through every detail, the dinner, the evidence, Blake and Craig being arrested, Kristen's exposure, how it was finally over. He stayed silent for a long moment, then released a flood of sobs, gasping, relieved, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he said when he could speak. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't need to," I said. "You're my brother. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Stay at the cabin a few more days while things settle, then come home to your new apartment." I'd already helped him secure a 1-bedroom across town, far from Kristen and her family. A safe space for Sophie, a fresh start for both of them. We talked a little longer, processing everything. Exhausted but relieved, still struggling to believe it was really over. After we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet room. The bruises throbbed, exhaustion seeped into my bones, and I let myself finally breathe. In the following months, the legal aftermath played out. Blake and Craig faced multiple felony charges: assault in the second degree, criminal threats, stalking, harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. Both took plea deals rather than risk a trial. Blake received 18 months in county jail plus 3 years probation. Craig got 14 months plus probation. Both were permanently barred from contacting Ethan or Sophie. Ethan's divorce from Kristen was finalized 4 months later. He obtained sole physical custody of Sophie. Kristen received supervised visitation. Only the presiding judge expressed outrage at her enabling behavior and emphasized that Ethan was the stable, protective parent. Even Kristen's parents reached out afterward. They apologized profusely, expressed shame over their son's actions and their own inaction, and asked to maintain a relationship with Sophie if Ethan allowed it. He agreed to supervised visits, recognizing them as her grandparents, and they appeared genuinely remorseful. As for me, I returned to my condo and my usual life. The bruises healed, the soreness faded, but the experience left a permanent mark. I understood now what it means to be truly vulnerable, trapped in a situation where asking for help feels impossible. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel bring more stories like this. Thank you.